My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for 25 years, I lived with the crushing weight of being my father's greatest disappointment. Not his only disappointment. Dad had plenty of those, but definitely his greatest. While other daughters got encouragement and pride from their fathers, I got lectures about wasted potential and comparisons to more successful people's children. Sarah's always been the dreamer in the family, Dad would say to his friends, and the way he said dreamer made it sound like a terminal illness. Never could get her feet on the ground, always chasing these artistic pursuits. The way he pronounced artistic pursuits was like he was describing something distasteful he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. I grew up in Riverside, a small town in Ohio where success was measured by steady jobs, practical choices, and staying close to home. My father, Robert Mitchell, was the town's most successful insurance agent, a man who believed in security, stability, and sensible decisions. He drove the same reliable sedan for 15 years, wore the same style of suits, and had the same routine every single day. And then there was me, his daughter who wanted to be a photographer. Photography isn't a career, Sarah, he told me when I was 16 and showed him my portfolio for the first time. It's a hobby. You need to think about your future, about supporting yourself. What about accounting? You're good with numbers. I wasn't particularly good with numbers, but Dad had convinced himself I was, because I'd gotten a B+ in algebra. In his mind, any skill that could lead to a real job was worth pursuing, while anything creative was a waste of time. When I graduated high school, I wanted to go to art school in New York. I had been accepted to the School of Visual Arts with a partial scholarship, but Dad refused to help with the remaining costs. "I'm not throwing my money away on some fantasy," he said, sitting in his home office surrounded by insurance files and motivational posters about building security for tomorrow. "You'll go to state, you'll study business or education, something practical, and you'll thank me later." So I went to Ohio State, majored in business administration, and spent 4 years feeling like I was slowly suffocating. I took photography classes as electives, but Dad made it clear these were just for fun and not to be taken seriously. "Focus on your real classes," he would say during our weekly phone calls. "The photography thing is fine as a stress reliever, but don't let it distract you from what's important." After graduation, I got a job at a marketing firm in Columbus, just as Dad had hoped. I wore business suits, attended meetings about quarterly projections, and tried to convince myself that this was what success looked like. But every day felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit, playing a role in a play I never auditioned for. The only thing that kept me sane was my camera. I would spend weekends exploring Ohio's countryside, capturing images of abandoned barns, misty mornings over cornfields, and the weathered faces of farmers at local markets. My apartment was filled with photographs I'd taken but never shown to anyone, especially not Dad. "How's the job going?" he would ask during our monthly dinners at the same restaurant we'd been going to since I was 12. "Fine," I would say, because what else was there to say? That I felt dead inside? That I spent my lunch breaks looking at photography websites and dreaming of a different life? That I was 23 years old and felt like I was already buried alive? Good, good. Stability is important, Sarah. You'll appreciate that when you're older. The breaking point came when I was 24. I had been working at the marketing firm for 2 years, and my boss offered me a promotion to senior account manager. It came with a significant raise, a corner office, and the kind of security Dad had always wanted for me. I should have been thrilled. Instead, I went home that night and cried for 3 hours. The next morning, I called in sick and drove to Hocking Hills State Park with my camera. I spent the entire day photographing waterfalls, hiking trails, and the play of light through the forest canopy. For the first time in months, I felt alive. That's when I made the decision that would change everything and disappoint my father more than he'd ever been disappointed before. I quit my job. "You did what?" Dad's voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "I quit, Dad. I'm going to pursue photography full-time." "Sarah, this is insane. You have a good job, security, benefits. You can't just throw that away for some pipe dream." "It's not a pipe dream. I'm good at this, Dad. Really good. Being good at something doesn't mean you can make a living at it. Do you know how many people think they're going to be professional photographers? Do you know how many of them end up waiting tables? I'd rather wait tables doing something I love than sit in an office doing something that makes me miserable." "Miserable? Sarah, you have no idea what miserable is. Miserable is not being able to pay your rent. Miserable is not having health insurance. Miserable is being 35 and realizing you've wasted your life chasing fantasies." The conversation ended with Dad hanging up on me, the first time he'd ever done that. We didn't speak for 3 weeks. When we finally did talk again, it was because Mom called and begged me to have dinner with them. Dad was civil but cold. treating me like a stranger who had disappointed him beyond redemption. "I hope you come to your senses soon," he said as I was leaving that night, "before it's too late to fix this mistake." But I didn't come to my senses, at least not in the way Dad hoped. Instead, I threw myself into photography with a determination I'd never felt before. I took on small jobs, family portraits, local events, real estate photography. I lived in a tiny studio apartment and ate ramen noodles more often than I care to remember, but I was happier than I'd been in years. Dad, however, was not happy. Our relationship became strained and formal. He would ask about my photography situation with the same tone he might use to ask about a chronic illness. When I told him about landing a small wedding or getting a portrait commission, he would nod politely and change the subject. "Still playing with cameras, I see," he said during one particularly painful dinner. "When are you going to get serious about your future?" "This is serious, Dad. This is my future." "Sarah, you're 25 years old. You can't live like a college student forever. What about retirement savings? What about buying a house? What about having a family? I can have all those things and still be a photographer." Not realistically. Not in the real world. The real world. Dad's favorite phrase. As if the world I was living in, the world where I was building a business, creating art, and finally feeling like myself, wasn't real enough for him. The worst part wasn't the lack of support or even the constant criticism. The worst part was the way Dad introduced me to people. "This is my daughter Sarah," he would say to his friends and colleagues. "She's between careers right now. Between careers." As if photography was just a gap year that had lasted too long. Or sometimes, "Sarah's trying to make it as a photographer." The emphasis on trying made it clear he expected me to fail. Once, at a family barbecue, I overheard him talking to my uncle. "I don't know where I went wrong with Sarah. I gave her every opportunity for a stable life, and she threw it all away to play with cameras. I just hope she figures it out before she ruins her life completely." That night, I went home and seriously considered giving up. Maybe Dad was right. Maybe I was delusional. Maybe I should go back to the marketing firm, apologize for my phase, and settle into the life he wanted for me. But then I looked at the photographs covering my apartment walls, images I had captured of moments that would have been lost forever if I hadn't been there with my camera. I thought about the families whose most precious memories I had preserved, the couples whose love I had documented, the beauty I had found in ordinary moments and transformed into something extraordinary. I realized that Dad's lack of belief in me said more about his fears than my abilities. He was so terrified of instability, so convinced that anything outside his narrow definition of success was doomed to failure, that he couldn't see what I was actually accomplishing. But I could see it. And for the first time in my life, I decided that my belief in myself was more important than his belief in me. I had no idea that everything was about to change, or that the father who had spent years introducing me as his disappointment would soon introduce me as his greatest pride. I had no idea that my pipe dream was about to become something that would not only vindicate my choices but transform our relationship forever. All I knew was that I was done apologizing for following my passion, done shrinking myself to fit into his vision of who I should be, and done waiting for his approval to live my life. The daughter he had dismissed as a dreamer was about to show him exactly what dreams could accomplish when they were pursued with enough determination and courage. But first, I had to survive the biggest professional challenge of my life. One that would either prove Dad right about my unrealistic career choice, or prove him spectacularly wrong. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was editing photos from a small wedding I'd shot the weekend before, surviving on coffee and determination, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Sarah Mitchell Photography," I answered, trying to sound more professional than I felt in my pajamas and messy bun. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Jennifer Walsh from National Geographic. I'm calling about your submission to our Emerging Photographers competition." I nearly dropped the phone. 3 months earlier, I had submitted a series of photographs I'd taken of Appalachian coal mining families. Intimate portraits that captured both the hardship and dignity of people whose way of life was disappearing. I had spent weeks in small Kentucky towns, building trust with families who had every reason to be suspicious of outsiders with cameras. "I'm pleased to inform you that your series, The Last Mountain, has been selected as our grand prize winner," Jennifer continued. "We'd like to feature your work in our December issue and discuss a potential assignment with our editorial team." The next few minutes were a blur. Jennifer explained that the prize included a $50,000 award, a feature spread in the magazine, and the opportunity to work on assignment for National Geographic, the holy grail for any photographer. After I hung up, I sat in my tiny apartment staring at the phone and trying to process what had just happened. National Geographic, the magazine I had dreamed of working for since I was a teenager, the publication that represented the pinnacle of photographic storytelling. My first instinct was to call Dad, but I hesitated. For 3 years, he had treated my photography career like an extended tantrum, something I would eventually outgrow. How would he react to this news? Would he finally understand that I hadn't been wasting my time? Or would he find some way to diminish this achievement too? I decided to call Mom first. "Sarah, oh my goodness, National Geographic." Mom's excitement was infectious, and I found myself crying with relief and joy. "Your father is going to be so proud." "Is he?" I asked, and I hated how uncertain I sounded. "Honey, of course he is. He's always been proud of you, even if he hasn't always known how to show it." But when Mom told Dad the news, his reaction was typically cautious. That's wonderful, Sarah," he said when he called me later that day. "But what does this mean exactly? Is this a one-time thing or—" "Dad, this is National Geographic. This is huge. They want to give me assignments, feature my work. This could change everything." "Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. One article doesn't make a career. You should still think about having a backup plan." Even in the face of what was objectively a major professional achievement, Dad couldn't bring himself to fully celebrate my success. I hung up feeling deflated, wondering if anything would ever be enough to earn his genuine pride and support. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The National Geographic team flew me to Washington, D.C. for meetings, and I found myself sitting in conference rooms with editors and photographers whose work I had admired for years. They offered me a contract for a year-long assignment documenting climate change impacts on rural American communities, exactly the kind of meaningful, important work I had always dreamed of doing. "Your eye for finding the human story within larger issues is exactly what we're looking for," Jennifer told me during one meeting. "You don't just photograph subjects, you reveal their humanity." The assignment would take me across the country, from Louisiana bayous threatened by rising sea levels to California farming communities facing unprecedented drought. It was dangerous, challenging work that would require me to live out of a suitcase for months at a time, but it was also the opportunity of a lifetime. When the December issue of National Geographic hit newsstands featuring my coal mining photographs, I bought 10 copies and drove to my parents' house. Dad was in his office when I arrived, working on insurance claims as usual. "Dad," I said, placing the magazine on his desk, "I wanted you to see this." He looked down at the cover, then opened to the feature spread. For several minutes, he studied my photographs in silence. I watched his face, trying to read his expression as he took in images of weathered miners, children playing in the shadows of coal processing plants, and families gathering around dinner tables in homes that had sheltered generations. "These are—" he started, then stopped. "Sarah, these are incredible. Thank you." "No, I had no idea. I knew you were taking pictures, but I didn't understand." He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something in his eyes that looked like respect. "This is real journalism. This is important work. It's what I've been trying to tell you, Dad. Photography isn't just taking pretty pictures. It's about telling stories that matter, documenting history, giving voice to people who might otherwise be forgotten." He nodded slowly, still looking at the magazine. "I owe you an apology, Sarah. I was wrong about this. I was wrong about you." It was the first time my father had ever admitted to being wrong about anything, let alone about me. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "I was scared," he continued. "I grew up in a time when creative careers seemed impossibly risky, especially for women. I wanted you to have security, stability. I thought I was protecting you." "I know, Dad, but I needed you to believe in me, not just protect me. I should have trusted you to know what was right for your life. I should have supported your dreams instead of trying to talk you out of them." That conversation marked the beginning of a transformation in our relationship. Dad started asking genuine questions about my work, showing interest in the stories behind my photographs, and even offering to help with the business side of my career. When I left for my National Geographic assignment, he drove me to the airport, something he had never done before. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," he said as we stood at the security checkpoint. "I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of the woman you've become and the work you're doing." The assignment was everything I had hoped it would be and more. I spent months traveling across America, documenting the human impact of climate change through intimate portraits and powerful landscapes. I lived with fishing families in Louisiana whose homes were slowly sinking into the Gulf, photographed farmers in California watching their fields turn to dust, and captured the resilience of communities adapting to a changing world. The work was physically and emotionally demanding, but it was also deeply fulfilling. I was using my skills to tell important stories, to bear witness to history, and to help people understand complex issues through human faces and personal experiences. Dad followed my journey through the updates I posted on my website and the articles that began appearing in National Geographic and other publications. He started sharing my work with his friends and colleagues, and I could hear the pride in his voice when he talked about my assignments. My daughter is documenting climate change for National Geographic, he would tell people, and the way he said it made it clear that he finally understood the significance of what I was doing. The culmination of the assignment was a major exhibition at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. My photographs would be displayed alongside work by some of the most respected documentary photographers in the world, as part of a comprehensive exhibition about climate change and American communities. When I called to invite my parents to the opening, Dad's response surprised me. "Sarah, I wouldn't miss this for anything. This is the most important thing you've ever done, and I want to be there to support you." The opening night was surreal. I stood in the museum, surrounded by my photographs blown up to gallery size, watching visitors stop and study images I had captured in some of the most remote and challenging locations in America. Climate scientists, policymakers, and art critics mingled with the families and individuals I had photographed, creating conversations between different worlds. But the moment that mattered most to me was when I saw Dad standing in front of a photograph I had taken of a Louisiana fishing family. 3 generations gathered on the porch of a house that would likely be underwater within a decade. He was reading the caption aloud to a small group of people who had gathered around him. "This is my daughter's work," I heard him say. She spent 2 weeks living with this family, learning their story, understanding what climate change means to real people. She's not just a photographer, she's a storyteller, a journalist, a voice for people who might otherwise be forgotten. Later that evening, as the reception was winding down, Dad found me standing in front of my favorite photograph from the series, a portrait of an elderly farmer in Kansas, his weathered hands holding soil that was too dry to grow anything. "Sarah," he said, "I need to tell you something." "What's that, Dad?" "I've been introducing you wrong all these years. I've been calling you my daughter who takes pictures, or my daughter who's trying to make it as a photographer. But that's not who you are." "What do you mean?" "You're my daughter who gives voice to the voiceless. You're my daughter who documents history. You're my daughter who uses her art to make the world a better place." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "You're my daughter who followed her dreams despite my doubts, and who proved that sometimes the most impractical path leads to the most important destination." "Dad, I'm sorry it took me so long to see it, Sarah. I'm sorry I spent so many years trying to make you smaller instead of celebrating how extraordinary you are, but I see it now, and I want you to know that you are my greatest pride." Standing there in the Smithsonian, surrounded by my life's work and hearing my father finally express the pride and support I had craved for so long, I felt a sense of completion I had never experienced before. Not because I needed his approval to validate my choices, but because I had finally bridged the gap between the daughter he had wanted me to be and the woman I had chosen to become. The girl who had been dismissed as an impractical dreamer had become a woman whose dreams were changing the world, one photograph at a time. And the father who had never believed in those dreams had become their proudest champion. 6 months after the Smithsonian exhibition, I was in the middle of photographing wildfire recovery efforts in Northern California when I received a call that would change everything once again. This time, it was from the Pulitzer Prize Committee. "Ms. Mitchell," the voice on the other end said, "I'm calling to inform you that your series, America's Climate Crossroads, has been awarded this year's Pulitzer Prize for feature photography." I had to sit down on a charred tree stump in what used to be someone's backyard. The Pulitzer Prize, the highest honor in American journalism, an award that represented not just professional achievement, but recognition that your work had made a meaningful impact on society. The committee was particularly impressed by your ability to humanize complex environmental issues, the caller continued. Your photographs don't just document climate change, they reveal its human cost in a way that statistics and reports cannot. After the call ended, I sat in the devastated landscape around me, trying to process what had just happened. 3 years ago, my father had been embarrassed to tell people I was a photographer. Now I was a Pulitzer Prize winner. The first person I called was Dad. "Sarah?" He answered on the first ring, as he always did now when I called from assignments. "Dad, I have news. Good news or bad news? Please tell me you're safe." "I'm safe, and it's very good news. Dad, I won the Pulitzer Prize." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. "Dad, are you there?" "I'm here," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "Sarah, did you just say you won the Pulitzer Prize?" "Yes, for the climate change series, the one that started with the coal mining photographs." Oh my God, Sarah, the Pulitzer Prize. My daughter won the Pulitzer Prize." I could hear him crying, something I had never heard before in my entire life. "Dad, are you okay?" "I'm more than okay. Sarah, I don't have words. I am so proud of you, I can barely breathe." The award ceremony was held at Columbia University in New York, and my parents flew in for the event. Dad had bought a new suit for the occasion, the first new suit he'd purchased in over a decade, and he spent the entire flight reading articles about previous Pulitzer Prize winners in photography. "Did you know that only 37 women have ever won the Pulitzer for photography?" he told me as we sat in the hotel restaurant the night before the ceremony. "And you're the youngest winner in the category's history. Dad, you've done more research on this than I have. I want to understand everything about this honor, Sarah. I want to be able to tell people exactly what this means." The ceremony itself was surreal. I sat in the auditorium at Columbia, surrounded by the country's most distinguished journalists, listening as my name was called, and my work was described as a powerful documentation of climate change's human impact that combines artistic excellence with journalistic integrity. But the moment that will stay with me forever happened after the ceremony, at the reception. I was talking with other award winners when I noticed a commotion near the entrance. Dad was standing with a group of people, and I could hear his voice carrying across the room. "That's my daughter," he was saying, pointing in my direction. "Sarah Mitchell. She just won the Pulitzer Prize for photography." I excused myself and walked over to see what was happening. Dad had apparently struck up a conversation with a group of journalism professors and was enthusiastically telling them about my work. "She spent a year traveling across the country, living with families affected by climate change," he was explaining. "She didn't just take pictures. She became part of their communities, earned their trust, told their stories with dignity and respect." "Dad," I said, approaching the group, "what are you doing?" "I'm telling these professors about your work," he said proudly. "Dr. Martinez here teaches photojournalism at Northwestern, and I thought he should know about your approach to documentary photography." Dr. Martinez smiled at me. "Your father has been giving us quite an education about your methods. He seems to understand your work better than some of my graduate students understand their own projects." Later that evening, as we walked back to the hotel, Dad was quiet for a long time. "Sarah," he finally said, "I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "For years, I introduced you as my daughter who was trying to make it as a photographer, or my daughter who was between careers. I was ashamed of those introductions, but I didn't know how to change them." "Dad, we've talked about this. You don't need to—" "Let me finish," he said gently. "Tonight, for the first time, I got to introduce you the way I should have been introducing you all along. Not as my daughter who takes pictures, but as my daughter, the Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist. My daughter who uses her art to change the world." He stopped walking and turned to face me. "But more than that, I got to introduce you as my daughter, who had the courage to follow her dreams even when her father didn't believe in them. My daughter who proved that sometimes the most important work comes from the most unexpected places." "Dad, I know I can't undo the years when I didn't support you the way I should have. I know I can't take back all the times I made you feel like your dreams weren't valid or important. But I want you to know that from now on, when people ask me about my children, the first thing I'm going to tell them is that my daughter is a Pulitzer Prize winner who uses photography to give voice to the voiceless. You don't have to lead with the Pulitzer Prize, Dad." "No, but I want to. Not because of the award itself, but because of what it represents. It represents you refusing to give up on yourself even when I gave up on you. It represents you believing in your vision even when I couldn't see it. It represents you becoming exactly who you were meant to be, despite my doubts." The next morning, we had breakfast at a small cafe near Columbia. Dad spent most of the meal showing my Pulitzer Prize to anyone who would look at it, telling strangers about my work with the enthusiasm of someone who had just discovered photography for the first time. "This is my daughter's Pulitzer Prize," he told the waitress, the couple at the next table, and the barista making our coffee. "She documents climate change, tells the stories of families whose lives are being transformed by environmental challenges." "Dad, you're embarrassing me," I said, but I was smiling. "Good," he replied. "I have 25 years of pride to make up for. I'm going to embarrass you with my bragging for the rest of my life." On the flight home, Dad pulled out a notebook and started writing. "What are you working on?" I asked. "I'm writing down everything I want to remember about this weekend," he said. "The ceremony, the reception, meeting all those professors and journalists. I want to remember every detail so I can tell people about it properly." "You don't need to write it down, Dad. You'll remember." "Maybe, but I want to be sure. This is the most important thing that's ever happened to our family, Sarah. My daughter won the Pulitzer Prize. I want to be able to tell that story for the rest of my life." 6 months later, I was back home in Ohio for a family gathering when I overheard Dad talking to my uncle in the backyard. "You know, I used to worry about Sarah," he was saying. "Thought she was being impractical, chasing impossible dreams. I spent years trying to talk her out of photography, trying to get her to choose something more stable. And now I realize I was the one who was being impractical. I was so focused on security and stability that I couldn't see that Sarah was building something much more valuable. A career that makes a difference. Work that matters. A life that has meaning. The Pulitzer Prize probably doesn't hurt either. The Pulitzer Prize is wonderful, but it's not why I'm proud of her. I'm proud of her because she had the courage to pursue her passion even when everyone, especially her father, told her it was impossible. I'm proud of her because she uses her talent to tell important stories, to help people understand complex issues, to give voice to communities that might otherwise be forgotten. He paused, and I could hear the emotion in his voice. I'm proud of her because she became exactly who she was meant to be, despite my doubts. She's not just my daughter, she's my hero. Standing there listening to my father talk about me with such genuine pride and admiration, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with awards or recognition. The man who had once introduced me as his greatest disappointment now introduced me as his greatest pride, not because I had won a prestigious award, but because I had stayed true to myself, despite his lack of faith. The journey from disappointment to pride hadn't been easy for either of us. It required me to believe in myself when he couldn't believe in me, and it required him to admit he had been wrong about something fundamental. But in the end, it had brought us closer together than we had ever been before. Now, when Dad introduces me to people, he doesn't just mention the Pulitzer Prize or the National Geographic assignments. He talks about the families I've photographed, the stories I've told, the impact my work has had on how people understand climate change and social issues. This is my daughter, Sarah, he says now. She's a photojournalist who documents the human impact of climate change. She's won the Pulitzer Prize, but more importantly, she's someone who uses her art to make the world a better place. And every time he says it, I can hear the pride in his voice. Not just pride in my achievements, but pride in the woman I chose to become despite his doubts. The daughter he never believed in had become the person he was most proud to call his own. The girl who had been dismissed as an impractical dreamer had proven that sometimes the most impractical dreams lead to the most important destinations. And the father who had never believed in those dreams had learned that believing in your children's potential is more important than protecting them from imagined failures. We had both learned that love sometimes means letting go of your fears for someone else's future and trusting them to create the life they're meant to live. And in the end, that trust had been rewarded in ways neither of us could have imagined. Legal disclaimer. This story is entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, real events, or real institutions is purely coincidental. The awards and institutions mentioned are used fictitiously,